Welcome to the BigFix briefing room for September 2022. My name is Dave Tamilo, and I'm a BigFix technical advisor based in the Chicago area. I've been working with BigFix for about 11 years now. If you'd like to contact me, the QR code on the screen has my email address. In case you're not aware, HCL BigFix offers a variety of monthly online webinars, including ones that go over recent security content and events. Today is September 15th, and this video will recap the main security content covered in yesterday's webinar that Joe Saylor presented. I'll be recapping the latest Microsoft security response updates. I'll briefly discuss CISA and the BODs and KEVs it publishes, and I'll also touch on some notable zero-day exploits announced earlier this week. So let's start with this month's Microsoft patch content. There are 64 flaws being fixed by Microsoft this month, and you can see the breakdowns on the screen, both from a component perspective and a severity rating perspective. Most of the components are pretty typical, but the Microsoft Dynamics flaw is one to keep an eye on, and I'll discuss that a little more in a minute. This information was drawn primarily from an article on thehackernews.com. The QR code on the screen will take you to that article if you'd like to read more. The 64 flaws in the latest Patch Tuesday release don't include the Chromium Edge CVEs that were announced in early September. In addition to the components listed on the previous slide, you can see some of the other notable software titles that need patching. These are all pretty typical. If you'd like to go directly to the MSRC vulnerability guide, you can use the QR code on the bottom of the screen. There are two zero-day vulnerabilities to take note of. The first is an exploit that's being actively used and leverages the Windows Common Log File System driver, which is what Windows uses to read its events log. This can allow a locally logged on user to elevate to system privileges. The second zero-day exploit allows an attacker on certain ARM systems to access sensitive information through vulnerable memory caching techniques. This can allow the attacker to see anything that's been loaded into memory. This information came from an article on bleepingcomputer.com, which is another good resource to use, and this QR code will take you to that article if you'd like to read more. Finally, we come to the biggest vulnerabilities for the month, both related to IPsec. The first one is an exploit on systems that have IPsec enabled through Internet Key Exchange. This is usually only done on servers, which explains why the CVSS score isn't higher. But a score of 8.5 still makes it worth noting. This exploit allows an attacker to execute any remote code using system privileges, which obviously is scary. The other exploit relates to Windows IPsec on IPv6. The other exploit relates to Windows IPsec on IPv6. This one allows an unauthenticated user to elevate privileges and execute remote code on any Windows box, which is why it has a CVSS score of 9.8. This exploit does require IPsec to be enabled, which is not by default. But if you're using IPv6, you probably have IPsec enabled, so it's something to be aware of. If you have IPv6 enabled just by default but aren't actively using it, the Center for Internet Security does recommend disabling IPv6 just to help reduce your attack surface in general. If you're a BigFix compliant user, there are audit checks and some of the external checklists that you can use to audit and disable IPv6 if needed. The screen clip at the bottom of the screen shows such checks for Windows 10 and RHEL 7 as an example. Now let's move on to CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security. CISA publishes what are called BODs, or Binding Operational Directives, that dictate how federal computer systems need to be patched. These federal systems are required to comply to the BODs, generally within 60 days of the publication of the BOD. For the private sector, CISA publishes what are known as KEVs, or Known Exploitable Vulnerabilities lists. CISA KEVs focus on those vulnerabilities that are known to be actively exploiting systems in the wild. While not binding, it's a good practice to keep up with the CISA KEVs and examine your systems against them. This month, CISA has added at least 30 more flaws or CVEs to the KEV, and they think they added 2 more yesterday. So it's at least 30 to 32. If you'd like to review the list directly on the CISA website, this QR code will take you there. In case you're not aware of it, BigFix lifecycle and/or compliance customers now have a console dashboard that can leverage the latest CISA KEV and find out what vulnerabilities they may be exposed to. To use the dashboard, you need to activate a new external site called Vulnerability Reporting and subscribe endpoints to it. Once activated, you'll see a search form like this, and when you search, the results will be brought up like this to allow you to create baselines to remediate against the vulnerabilities. Next, let's talk briefly about some other big vulnerabilities out in the wild. On Tuesday, September 13th, a ZeroDay for macOS and iOS was announced that allows an attacker to execute arbitrary code with elevated privileges. There is a patch available for this one. Google announced a ZeroDay for Chrome that is actively being exploited, but they haven't provided many details as of yet. It's a data validation vulnerability, which means that the user would have to click on the malicious link for the exploit to be used, so it's not quite as dangerous as some of the others we've talked about. As of yesterday, we were still waiting for Google to publish a patch. VMware Tools, the locally installed VMware Tools package for Windows VMs, allows a locally logged on attacker to elevate to system privileges. Earlier I mentioned about the Microsoft Dynamics vulnerability. On-prem systems running Dynamics are vulnerable to remote code execution attacks. You'll notice that there are 2 CVEs related to this, and Microsoft published patches this week for both. So if you're running Dynamics, you definitely want to apply these patches. That brings us to the end of this briefing. Here are some common BigFix links with QR codes that might be of interest. The big QR code in the middle of the screen will take you to the BigFix webinars page, where you can find both upcoming webinars that you can sign up for and past webinars that you can watch again or watch if you missed them the first time. This is the events and webinars page, which lists the upcoming webinars that you can sign up for or past webinars that you can watch the replays of. Thanks for your time and watching this video, and have a great day.